Hello there. This is the third of the 4-vlog series about Muzium Negara. This is Gallery C, Colonial Era. Hope you enjoy this vlog.
So downstairs we were talking about the land Silk Road and the sea Silk Road. Now in those days, whether your trade or goods go by land or by sea, you have to go through one point here before it gets over into Europe. Have you heard of Constantinople? What's the modern name for Constantinople? Constantinople. Istanbul. Yes. Constantinople is the gateway over into Europe in those days. Whether by land or by sea, you have to go to Constantinople. From Constantinople, it will go into Genoa or Venice. And that's how all the spices, the trade goods and all that will go over into Europe.
You mean it reached the land there, it goes by land, then it goes by sea again?
Yeah.
Oh, not through the Suez Canal.
Hello, this is talking about
Long time ago. Okay.
long time ago. Mana the Suez Canal.
Alright.
So, 1453 was the year when changes took place. Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Empire. So now it goes into Muslim control. So, taxes and a lot of things happen lah. So one of the first countries that says that I do not want my things to go through them, but I now want to find a way to come over to here directly to acquire the goods is Portugal. So Prince Henry the Navigator, you've heard of this person, he started this naval academy to try and build better charts, sailing techniques, better ships for the purpose of trying to make it all the way here. Portuguese managed to make their way over into this place. So why is Malacca targeted? Because in those days, like a computer game, you only need to control 3 points and you basically control the entire trade route. Red Sea, Persian Gulf, Malacca Strait. These are the 3 choke points which basically controls the entire sea Silk Road. If you control these 3 points, you basically control the entire route already. So that's why Malacca was one of the targeted objectives. Okay. So anyway, the Portuguese managed to come to here, and it was a period of glory for them, because not only did they come to Malacca, they went to Peru. That's why they went to Macau. They even went as far away as to Japan and all that. And it was followed by the other European people. So anyway, they came here. That's why their arrival here not just only affected Malacca, but the politics of the entire region. It's not just only us. All the neighbors was also affected by their coming over. So initially he was asked to, not take on the hard approach, but a more soft approach, which is try to establish trade. And but unfortunately, like I said, the Gujaratis, like I said, they had a very powerful influence, and they also talk bad about these Portuguese people based on what they know, what they did in India. So they said that, don't trust these people, you should attack them and all this kind of thing. and somehow or another the Sultan followed their advice and they tried to capture the Portuguese, but they managed to escape and went back to Goa, reported to the head there, Alfonso, and so in 1511 they came and attacked and finally conquered Malacca. Okay, so during Malacca had quite a number of people. They had like probably around 20,000 people, soldiers and all that. But of course their armaments are very much primitive in nature. They also had like 20 war horses. So they have actually war horses. And they also had Turkish missionaries amongst their defenses. But unfortunately, the Portuguese were much more better equipped. There's a couple of dates that people might use. You might come across a date in July, and then there's also the August date, and also this date. So basically, these dates are all correct. It's just that they refer to different things. 25th July was the date when the Portuguese started the attack. So 10 August was also a date of a major attack. And the actual date when it was captured was actually 24th August. So sometimes historians, the books may quote the date when the attack first started, which is in July. But the date when the F4 actually appeared was on 24th August. So you got to be mindful about which date the writers are actually using in describing the fall of Flor de Lama. So it is said that this ship was filled with to the maximum with all the gold and treasures that they took from Malacca. So 6 days after it left the port of Malacca to go back to Portugal, it sank. And until today, this is one of the undiscovered sunken treasures that is said to be worth billions of dollars that has still not been recovered. Whether any, concerted effort is made to discover it, might not take place because it's a Portuguese ship, it's a Malaysian treasure, but it's Indonesian waters, so it can get very complicated. Because maritime law says that anything found in the sovereign country actually belongs to the sovereign, unless some kind of deal is made. Because it sank in the Straits of Aru. So Straits of Aru is actually in the northern part of Sumatra. But whether you can actually find anything is very doubtful because that part of the seaside is actually quite strong, the currents are quite strong. So whatever there is could be buried under layers and layers of mud, or it could be just washed away to much glory. Well, they certainly got a lot of glory when they founded so many new places like Pergu, Macau, Malacca, and all the other areas. The gold would come from the conquest of Malacca. Unfortunately, the ship sank, and there was also the God objective. So the God objective was to convert as many people to Christianity, basically in retaliation to the fall of Constantinople. So to take revenge, so they wanted to convert as many people to Christianity. But unfortunately, the way they did that wasn't very good because over in Goa, in India, they actually killed a lot of the Muslim people there. And those who are unmarried ladies, they got them to marry with the sailors and sort of like force convert them to Christianity. So that was one of the things, the stories that the Gujaratis says this is what these horrible people do. So that's why the Sultan took action, because all these things tells how bad and cruel they are. So that's why their this objective wasn't very well achieved. So if you look at the map, you can see that the fort where Formosa is actually next to the sea. So if you go to St. Paul's Hill right now and you look out, you don't see a sea. You see a sea of cars and people. That is how much changes that has taken place. All the reclamation activities from the fort area down there, the swimming pool is probably around here until to here. It's all reclaimed already compared to what it was like that you see in the map here. Okay. So where did they run away to?
Indonesia.
Have you heard of stories that says that Johor, Perak is very closely linked to Malacca? The youngest son went with the Sultan down to Johor. That is why the lineage continues down to Johor. The eldest son went up to Perak. So that is why Perak also has this continuity or link to the Malacca Sultanate. But unfortunately, both the Johor line and the Perak line has already terminated. Like the Johor line, after the end of the Malacca lineage, then you have got the Bendahara and then also the Temenggung. So the current Sultanate is from the Temenggung line. But historically, Johor has this close link with the Malacca Sultanate, but it's actually a totally different line already. But somehow or another, that history is still there. Okay. Portuguese took control over here, but after they took control, other colonial powers also very much wanted this place because of what the power it holds. And the next country or colonial power was actually the Dutch. And their fight between the Portuguese and the Dutch started as early as 1606. Okay. And this fight in 1606 occurred at a place called Tanjung Tuan. You know where is Tanjung Tuan, right? Port Dickson.
Oh.
Okay. You know Cape Ricardo, where the Raptor Watch takes place. That Tanjung Tuan. So the ship that sank between this first major battle between the Dutch and the Portuguese forces was the Nassau. This is the Nassau. So remember downstairs there's this shipwreck I was telling you about, the Nassau. So these are all the shipwreck items that was excavated out from the Nassau. And this battle that took place in Tanjung Tuan, Port Dickson in 1606 was actually the first ever major battle between these two forces. 1606 until 1641, that was how long they fought before the Dutch managed to take Malacca away from the Portuguese in 1641. In the fort also, if you go to the original fort, you will come across this, 1670. So this is by the Dutch. So why this date 1670? Because after they took control of the fort in 1641, they had to start doing up the patchwork and repair works to the fort because they needed to use it. So it was only completed in 1670. So that's why you will see this if you go and visit the Formosa Gateway in Malacca. How did they get to come inside here without fighting? It comes about during the period of time in 1786 when Francis Light acquired Penang from the Sultan of Kedah. Okay. Actually, before this date, there was an earlier offer by the Sultan of Kedah to Francis Light that says that give me protection from the Siamese people and I will let you have Kedah. So when Francis Light passed the message back to his bosses, they weren't interested. They were more interested in other places. But in 1786, when this offer was made, Francis Light immediately took action to accept the island without consultation with his boss. Why was that so? Why did he do that? Because he was partially influenced by what was happening over back home in Europe. Earlier in 1775, the British Empire lost the 13 colonies. You know, 13 colonies refer to which countries? America. 1775, 4th of July, they declared independence, so the American Revolution took place. So eventually, they managed to get their independence ratified, and so basically they lost the 13 colonies. And in those early days also, when they were here, the British did not come into Malacca and the other places. They concentrated a lot of their trading activities between China and India, the silk and the tea trade. But when these ships were moving between these two places, where is their rest stop?
Malacca.
But it doesn't belong to them. How safe would it feel? It's under Dutch control. So they not Penang not yet, no? Haven't taken place yet. So before all this happening, so over that Europe down there lost 13 colonies. Here no R&R stop. So that's why when this offer was made, Francis Light took it on his own to accept it, because he realized that you need your own port to replenish the food supply, the water, and things like that. So even though he could not offer the protection that the Sultan wanted, so that one is another side story how it got played out about it. So I won't go into that. But after they got hold of Penang, then they managed to get hold of Malacca for a short period of time because of another event that was happening over in Europe, the French Revolution. So when that happened, Dutch fell to the French. So the English people told the Dutch people, let us look after your foreign assets. Don't let it fall to the French, because the English and the French were enemies for many hundreds of years. Okay, if you know about the history between the fight between English and the French, they're fighting for many years. So don't let them control it. So Malacca was given over to the English to look after for a short period of time. The English, of course, took the opportunity to destroy the fort, and before returning it back. So after it was returned back, the English people start to look into another place that they can use as a fort. Because although Penang is okay, but it's not the best. So the person who did this was Raffles. Okay? Because after Penang was acquired, Raffles came in to be the administrator. And he was looking for actually a better place. And he was eyeing Singapore. So in Singapore, he somehow managed to, talk to the correct brother to take over the sultanship, and somehow or another he managed to wrangle a treaty or an agreement whereby he managed to get hold of Singapore in 1819. Okay, so now 1819 Singapore is under the British, and earlier Penang was under the British. Then after that, because when this Singapore earlier was under Dutch control, under Dutch influence. So when Raffles sort of made this deal and acquired Singapore, he upset a lot of people. He upset his bosses, he upset the Dutch people. So much so that in order to settle everything, there was an agreement, or they started to really come to a tabletop. And finally, in 1824, there was this agreement to exchange properties. Because at that time, British was having Bencoolen and Malacca was under Dutch. So that's why they exchanged the property, and a line was drawn in between the two, whereby the Dutch will control the Indonesian side and the British will take this. So this was in 1824. So from this date onwards, the British managed to control Penang, Singapore, and Malacca, and to centralize the administration, we call it the Strait Settlement. So from 1824, you would note that the English people did not conquer any new lands. They were just happy to do trading activities with the people around here. Until the next milestone event, which was in 1874. So this was the next part of the history milestone event, whereby the British start to come in and exercise their control to the lands here. They were very happy not to do anything, because from 24 until 74, they didn't want to do it, because as a company, you do not want to spend money fighting war and invading. Why do that when you can just trade and make money and all that? But this 1874, what happened was that there was a lot of conflict going on in Perak. The Gihin, Haisan, the Larut Wars, then the Sultan was fighting over things like that. So much so that economic activities could not proceed. Businessmen was losing money. So they complained and says that you have to do something. Otherwise, nothing can be done. So that's why they have to step in and took control. The Bangkok Treaty was signed, and they took control, and they didn't just stop with Perak. They also controlled Pahang, Negeri Sembilan, and Selangor. Why these 4 states? Because all 4 states contain a lot of tin. And tin was very, very important at that point in time to the economic prosperity of the British Empire. So eventually from here, the Federated Malay States was formed. So that is another second block. The third block comes about. You have Kedah, Kelantan, Terengganu. The British didn't want to touch these states, because these states is a buffer zone between them and the Siamese. And basically, Siam, Thailand, is a buffer country between the British and the French Indochina. Remember, the French and the British are enemies for a very long time. Thailand is in between, it's a buffer. So they are worried that if you do anything to this northern part, it might upset the Siam, and then that would pave the way for conflict again with French. But eventually, British and French peace treaty was signed. So now the British can take action to control the northern states. Why they took action to control the northern state was because of an incident. What happened was that one of the retired soldiers or generals in the British Army went to Kelantan and for a very small sum of money actually leased a big chunk of the land. So that shocked the British administrators. What if suddenly some other party come in and go and lease or buy up the land? Then we'll be in trouble. And they were very worried because there was another power coming into play at that time. And that was the German power. So actually, Swettenham actually advised the authorities and says that you have to take some action, otherwise some German businessmen can come in and suddenly acquire this and they would have a foothold into these territories, and that would be problematic. So that is why they sort of have this arrangement whereby they were advised, but you don't have to work. So the Unfederated States was formed, was finally made up in 1919. So eventually you got the Strait Settlement, Federated, Unfederated. Rubber is not found here. It is only found in Brazil. But if you look through the list of countries in the British Empire, not a single country has rubber. Rubber is so much in demand. How can the British Empire be losing out to this big economic pie that is booming? So they wanted to have part of it, and that's why they find ways and means to try and smuggle the rubber seeds out of Brazil to be planted out in their own colonies. The person who managed to finally succeed is Wickham, and the story is, of course, he managed to bring out 80,000 rubber seeds, and whether or not he is said to be a smuggler or not depends on the fine details of history. Okay, because if people who says that it was a legitimate activity, exporting it out, that is because they just look at him having an export permit. Yes, he has an export permit. The people who say he's a smuggler is because they look into the fine details of the export permit. Because the export permit at that time says that you are not allowed to bring out live rubber seeds. You can bring out only dead seeds, but he brought out the live seeds. So that's why people say that he's a smuggler. And of course, when it comes to this rubber, a lot of people say that Ridley is the person who planted the first few trees here in Malaya. But actually that's not true, okay? Because the famous old rubber tree in Kuala Kangsar that was planted in 1876 or something like that, Ridley only came in to take the position as the director of the Botanical Gardens in 1888. So the rubber tree was actually planted quite 10 years before even Ridley actually came in. So it's not possible for him to be the one who planted the rubber trees. So the one who actually planted the rubber trees is the assistant botanical supervisor, J.H. Merton. So he's the one who actually planted. But Ridley is the person who managed to popularize and improve on the rubber production so much so that it became very successful. It comes from the development or the invention of food canning. So with the invention of making tin food, allowed food to be stored for wars, and that's why tin was very, very important and crucial to all this British expansion, because they were involved in wars all over the place. And this invention actually allowed their army, the soldiers, to have food supplies and also the armaments and a lot of other stuff. So in those days, the extraction method was very much primitive, either panning or open cast mines and things like that. So these are okay, but still not fast enough for the British needs. So that is why they introduced the use of the tin dredge. So here in Malaya, there is still one last dredge that you can visit, which is in Tanjung Tuala, whereby they have the last, well-preserved tin dredge called TT5. So you can go there and visit and talk to actually the last surviving dredge master, who will tell you what was life working as on this tin dredge. So this tin dredge can be almost as big as this one part of the gallery. How many people do you think would take to run this big machinery like this?
Few hundred?
Only 12 to 16 people. So you can imagine, when all this kind of machineries was introduced, the amount of people that lost their jobs, it was very high. But then of course, tin dredges like this is very expensive. You can't just implement it at all locations. It has to be a very rich deposit before you can employ machinery like this to make it worthwhile. But you only need 12 to 16 persons to run it 24 hours a day in shifts and 365 days. So you can see how much the British people invested into this country. Amongst all the three colonizers, the Dutch, the Portuguese and the British, you have to bear in mind that the Dutch and the Portuguese, they didn't take over the whole country. They were just only interested in Malacca. And even within Malacca, it was just only the port area. They weren't even interested in the hinterlands, the inlands, just the port area. But the British, the entire country, the entire peninsula was in control by them, because they wanted to get the resources, the tin, rubber and other resources, put it onto ships and send them over to America, which is where the marketplace is. So the British actually invested a lot of money and time into building all this infrastructure, the railways, the roads and all that, for the purpose of moving it to the place where it's been extracted, to the ports, to send on their British ships to send over to America. So they took the most, but they also left us the most love. So it's whether or not it's an equitable trade-off is something
To be debated.
talk about. Okay. So the last people who come for the resources here was the Japanese. This was here because when they invaded China in 1937, of course earlier they were already in Manchuria, but basically the 1937 invasion caused the Americans, the British and the other countries to put an embargo on resources going into Japan. Practically all of Japan's oil comes from America. So once you stop the oil flow going in, they had no choice. How can their industries move? So that's why they were eyeing this place for the resources, especially during World War II. So that's why they took part in the invasion of this area to get into the resources, the oil in Borneo, the tin in Malaya, and also in Indonesia, the rubber and all these things. Because all these resources are very, very crucial to their war effort. You may not see it, but an average car has about 500 over rubber components. So they have all these little tanks, but it's not all steel. There's, like probably half a ton of rubber components in every tank that is being built. The warships and all that, how much of rubber goes in? It's actually a lot. So all these resources are actually very vital. And the invasion process actually occurred in a very, very fast and quick manner. They were expecting the invasion, the British was expecting the invasion to come from the sea area. So that's why they actually spent $60 million to build a naval base there. But unfortunately, 60 million to build a naval base there. 60 million. But unfortunately, no assets, because all the assets was tied up in the war in Europe. So during the time of the invasion, there is these two ships. Actually, Force Z, so the Repulse and the Prince of Wales. But actually, this is not accurate, because Force Z actually comprised of 6 ships. So you've got the Repulse and the Prince of Wales, and actually 4 destroyers. But what happened was, why these 2 ships were sunk is because these are very, very new ships. The destroyers are a little bit older vehicles. So during the process, the ships was actually separated from the 4 ships, support vessels, and they were in front. So making them very easy targets for the Japanese Air Force to sink them. Okay. So that's one clarification. Force Z is actually 6 ships, not just 2 ships. The other thing is, the invasion fleet comes from Indochina. The invasion did not come from Japan directly. Why were they in Indochina? Because French Indochina was already, the French territories was already taken over by Germany when Germany invaded France. So Germany actually asked Japan whether you want to use this territory, and Japan says yes. So that's why the invasion fleets come from French Indochina. Actually, from the invasion fleet comes from Hainan Island also. So the invasion fleet for Peninsular Malaysia comes from Hainan, and the invasion fleet for Borneo comes from
Indochina.
From Vietnam and side there. Yeah. So these are the 2 places where the invasion fleet comes from. So the attack force landed in the northern part, and along the way, so the first battle was of course the Kota Baru one, which was quite fearsome. Then there was also the Battle of Jitra. After the fall of Jitra here, all the planes was evacuated down to Singapore. So then Penang was also abandoned by all the British forces. Every single white resident down there escaped, went down to KL, and then from there went down to Singapore. So by the time the next contact point was in Kampar. So Kampar was one place where there was quite good fight between the British and the Japanese. It lasted for about 4 days, but eventually the British retreated because they received news that there was they will be outflanked by the Japanese. Okay? So some Japanese landed over here, and if they don't retreat, then they will be cut off. So that's why they retreated. So by the time it reached Kuala Lumpur, there was no how to say, offensive operation. Basically, Kuala Lumpur was a walkover. The Japanese people just walked in, and it was already abandoned by the British forces. So the next major battle between the Japanese and the British forces occurred somewhere in Muar, this area. So this was the area where the next big fight took place, lasting about almost 9 days. So after the war's records were saying that was the best fight between the British and the Japanese, because they really give to each other as good as, whatever. So that was their most fearsome fight between the British and the Japanese forces. So eventually they all retreated, and finally by after almost about 70 days, they managed to conquer the whole place all the way up to Singapore. So part of the reason why the invasion was so fast was because they said that the use of bicycles. Okay, so the bicycles helped the Japanese people to chase after the British army who was retreating very fast. So when you look at these bicycles, it may seem like they can really move very fast, but you have to bear in mind that the invasion was taking place at the end of the year. So end of the year is actually the monsoon period. So, and our roads are not tarred except for the main trunk road. So if you are going through the kampung roads and stuff like that, after heavy rain, it can get very muddy. So you can imagine your bicycles with a thick layer of mud and things like that. And then during the daytime, it could be hot sun. So the hot and then the cold and all that. So it's quite easy for the tires to puncture and things like that. So in picture, you just look at it like very glamorous and all that. But actually, they also have a lot of difficulties when they were using the bicycles.
Thank you for watching. If you haven't seen vlogs about Gallery A and Gallery B, please go and watch them. Upcoming will be a vlog about Gallery D, which is Malaysia today. Please click the like button, share and subscribe. Until next time, see ya.